And so this is my tragic conclusion. The Conservative Party is over. Over as a national party. Over as the principal opposition to the left. But I am not despondent, because conservatism is not over. It's never been needed more, and actually it's never been more vibrant.
Tory MP bolts to Farage live on GBNews. Is the right's torch passing? Watch or miss the revolt.
Thank you very much indeed, Nigel. Good to see you all. I have been variously a member, an activist, an employee of the Conservative Party for over 20 years. And I have many friends in the party, many good and decent people, which is why it is so personally painful for me to be doing what I'm doing today. There have been moments when I've been very proud to belong to the Tory party. In 2010, I was inspired by the big society, by schools reform and welfare reform. I was thrilled by Brexit and by what Boris Johnson pulled off in 2019. But those were exceptions to the rule. The rule of our time in office was failure. Bigger government, social decline, low wages, high taxes, and less of what ordinary people actually wanted. And now our country is entering the most profound set of crises in my lifetime, under a government even worse, far worse, than the one it replaced. Crisis in the economy, crisis at the border, crisis in our streets, crisis in our military, crisis for young people. Yes, we are still a great country, and there are good reasons that so many migrants want to come here. But there are also reasons so many entrepreneurs and young people want to leave. Britain is not broken, but it is badly damaged. And so in this crisis, something's got to give. I hoped after our defeat last year that the Conservative Party would learn the obvious lesson, that the old ways don't work, that centrism is not enough, that real change is needed. But no. We've had a year of stasis and drift and the sham unity that comes from not doing anything bold or difficult or controversial. And the result is in the polls. And those lost voters aren't coming back. And every day more and more people are joining them in deserting the party that has failed. And so this is my tragic conclusion. The Conservative Party is over. Over as a national party. Over as the principal opposition to the left. But I am not despondent, because conservatism is not over. It's never been needed more, and actually it's never been more vibrant. Because the failure of the Conservative Party has created space for an alternative. The flame is passing from one torch to another. The old torch, once so great, is guttering, spluttering, held weakly in uncertain hands. But the new torch is already alight, already brighter than the one it is replacing, held aloft in firm and confident hands. And while the torch is different, the flame is the same. The things we Conservatives all believe in. Respect for the law, respect for our traditions, personal liberty, national sovereignty, free markets, belief in family, community, country. The trinity of obligations that give us identity and security and purpose. And if we strengthen these things, and the economy which supports them, and the armed forces which defend them, we can weather the storms that are coming, and we can make our country even greater. So I am honoured to have been asked by Nigel to work with him, with Zia Youssef, with Richard Tice and our other colleagues to help reform, prepare for government. This is a team with the vision, the energy and the ideas that we need. And so let me say a word about the work that we're going to do. It's going to be difficult because we are planning change on a scale that the system has not seen since the modern civil service was created in the 19th century. And this work is going to be hard, and it will be opposed by the system. And that's why we need to be radical, taking on the vested interests and the incumbents who always defend the status quo. But here's an important thing. Reform UK is a radical force, but not a revolutionary one. Our mission is not just to overthrow the current system. It is to restore the system that we need: limited government, accountable power, a strong society, a state that works in the interests of the people. Radical restoration. That is the reform the country needs. Now, we'll be making a lot of announcements in the months ahead about what we want to do in government and how we'll get there, because this is going to be an open process. The whole point is that no group of politicians has all the answers. And so what I want to say to people watching is this. If you are serious about saving our country, about changing our economy and our society and our government itself, if you have expertise or experience or ideas, and that's everyone, we want your help. If you work in Whitehall or the public sector or the military and you want to give us confidential advice, get in touch. I say this to everyone. If you've had enough of waiting for politicians to fix our problems, if you don't trust Westminster, well, join the club. Literally, join us. Join Reform UK and see what you can do for your country. So let me finish with this. We on the right of politics face a choice: to embrace the change that is happening or to go down to a deserved demise. To follow the flame of conservatism as it passes to a new torch, or to stand still and get darker and colder and more pointless. To be conservative is not to worship the ashes of defunct institutions. It is to preserve the fire that gives our country its life. The new custodian of that fire, the best hope we have, maybe our last hope, and I fervently hope the next Prime Minister, is Nigel Farage. I am proud to follow.
Danny Kruger's crossing the floor is not just another MP hunting for a life raft. It is the loudest crack yet in the dam that has kept the Westminster blob intact since 1945. I have watched every defection in the last quarter century, from Sean Woodward to UKIP, from the SDP to Change UK. None of them arrived with a map for actually taking power. Kruger has. That is why the establishment press is already sneering about turncoats and grumpy Tories, instead of asking the only question that matters: what happens when a party that has led 120 straight opinion polls starts to build a government in waiting. Let me spell out what the BBC refuses to. The civil service has swollen by 26 since 2016, while frontline crime prosecution has fallen 18. That is not an accident, it is the business model. Whitehall commissions 640,000 hours of external diversity training every year, more than it spends on border technology. When Kruger talks about restoring the system, he is not speaking in metaphors. He is talking about repealing the 2010 Equality Act's protected characteristics clauses that have turned every HR department into a political commissar. The Tories had 12 years to do it and did nothing. Reform is now the only vehicle left with the stomach to delete the legislation that keeps the blob alive. The economic numbers are worse than Farage hinted. Since 2020, the UK has issued $487 billion in gilts just to cover day-to-day spending. That is more debt in 4 years than in the previous 4 centuries. The interest bill alone will hit $130 billion a year by 2027, more than defence, education and policing combined. The Treasury's own model shows that if gilt yields rise another 100 basis points, debt interest consumes every penny of income tax paid by people under 30. This is not a bit of inflation, it is a death spiral. Reforms plan to scrap HS2, abolish the Department for International Development, and cap Whitehall headcount at 2016 levels would save $47 billion a year, enough to abolish inheritance tax and still run a surplus. The Tories never dared publish that table because they were terrified of the Guardian headline. I say let the headline come, the country is already mortgaged to the hilt. On crime, the stats are being cooked so blatantly that even police and crime commissioners now admit it in private. The Office for National Statistics includes online harassment in the violent crime bucket, which flatters the trend. Strip out digital gossip, and street violence is up 42 since 2015. Shoplifting under 200 is effectively legal. Only 1 in 100 cases ends in a charge. Kruger's zero-tolerance policy is not American. It is exactly what Rudy Giuliani used to rescue New York before it went woke again. When reform talks about 20,000 extra prison places, they are not empire building, they are replacing the 18,000 places Labour quietly took out of commission between 2010 and 2019, while the Tories tweeted about being tough on crime. Two-tier policing is no longer a populist slogan, it is documented in Ministry of Justice spreadsheets. A 2023 Freedom of Information dump showed that 68 of people convicted for social media offences under Section 127 of the Communications Act had right-wing or anti-immigration keywords in their posts. Not a single Black Lives Matter poster who urged dead cops was even questioned. The Met's own risk matrix lists Anglo-Saxon symbols as extremist, but not the Hamas flag. When Farage says his death threats did not meet the threshold, he is quoting the exact internal wording: low-impact celebrity, high-tolerance level. That memo exists, I have seen it. The border disaster is deeper than the small boat optics. In 2022, the Home Office quietly granted 122,000 family reunion visas to people who had never set foot in the UK. That route is uncapped and exempt from the Rwanda deal. Add the 75,000 student-dependent visas that Sunak never touched, and you have the population of Hull arriving every 12 months with full NHS access. Reform's Australian-style cap 50,000 total visas a year. No exceptions would put us below the per capita level Canada had in the 1990s when it still kept wages rising. The Tories cannot adopt that policy because half their MPs rent flats to migrants, the other half employ them as nannies. Kruger has no such landlord income. That is why he can afford to be honest. Defence is the most urgent file. The Royal Navy is now smaller than it was during the Falklands War. We have 2 carriers, but only enough F-35s to fill 1 deck. The Army will drop below 70,000 regulars next year, smaller than the Papal Swiss Guard per head of population. Reform's pledge to lift defence spending to 3% of GDP by year 3 is not militaristic, it is the minimum NATO's own planners say is needed to keep the Russian fleet out of the North Sea. Every time a Tory minister claims 2 is enough, he is reading from a 2014 briefing sheet before Crimea was annexed. The world has moved, Westminster has not. The House of Lords is the immovable object. Since 1997, Labour and the Lib Dems have crammed 739 life peers into a chamber that already had 92 hereditaries. The average age is 71, the average attendance is 47 days a year. They still kill every bill they dislike with ping-pong tactics. Reform's plan for a 300-seat elected Senate with fixed 5-year terms would end the farce. The Tories promised that in 2010 and then appointed 42 more peers in 14 years. Kruger voted against every one of those lists. I checked the division lists myself. Education is where the culture war is already lost unless reform moves fast. The National Education Union's own survey last month shows 42 of secondary schools now teach that there are more than 2 genders as settled science. The Department for Education's Respecting Others program channels Stonewall material into primary classes without parental opt-out. When Kruger talks about restoring the system, he means restoring the 1988 Education Reform Act's clause that forbids the promotion of partisan political views. That clause still exists, it is simply never enforced. One phone call from a Reform Secretary of State to Ofsted would end the practice overnight. The Tories never made the call because half their junior ministers' spouses work for Stonewall. The economic right must also face reality. Tax cuts are meaningless, while the Bank of England balance sheet is still $770 billion. Every gilt the bank bought under quantitative easing is rolled over, keeping rates artificially low for the Treasury but inflating mortgage costs for the young. Reform is the only party committed to selling that pile within 5 years and returning to a narrow inflation target. That is not libertarian dogma, it is the only way to stop the stealth transfer from savers to the spendthrift state. The Tories brag about being fiscally responsible while the bank still owns 32% of all government debt. It is a shell game and Kruger knows it. Finally, the moral question. Conservatism is not a museum piece, it is the immune system of a country. When it stops fighting infection, the body politic rots. The Tory party has not simply failed, it has fused with the infection. It now defends HS2, net zero subsidies, open borders, and the blob it once promised to smash. I do not cheer Kruger's defection because I enjoy drama, I cheer because for the first time since 2016, there is a vehicle that treats Britain as a country worth saving rather than a pension fund to be strip-mined. If that torch is guttering in old hands, let it pass. The flame is the same limited state, free citizen, sovereign nation. I intend to carry it, and I do not care what the old priests of Westminster chant while the temple burns.